All right, so good evening, everyone. Thanks to those of you who are attending live, and for those of you who are going to watch the recording, I appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to Poliventure. This is our workshop that covers the interaction or the connection between games and political science. This is a new workshop, but I'm pretty excited to share because it lets me basically explore games, and I like playing games. So you know, it's good fun all around. This is our week 4, so we're almost halfway through the term. Recall that this is an 8-week term, not a 6-week term. So slow and steady is going to win this race. Keep at it and keep going. I appreciate you sticking with it and turning in your assignments and getting things done. So with that, happy 4th, and let's get going. So for week 4, we're going to explore the game Settlers of Catan, and we're building on week 3 where we talked about and we introduced a 5th concept of network. So our learning objectives for this workshop are the following. First, by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to apply the concept of the network to a popular board game, in this case, Settlers of Catan. And secondly, you'll be able to describe how a network, whether simple or complex, makes the game, whether it's simple or complex, will always make the game more complex. So we have now 5 concepts that we explore. The first one's communication, whether it can be direct or indirect, information, which is complete or incomplete, strategy, which can be cooperative or competitive, moves, which can be simultaneous and sequential. And then this 5th concept that we introduced in week 3 is a network, and it can be either simple or complex. Now, there's a game called Settlers of Catan. And what we'll do is we'll watch a 7-minute tutorial about how this game is played. So we're all on the same page with respect to the mechanics of the game. So let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen for just a moment. And then let me share my screen again to make sure that the audio is on. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and click on this link here. And if you can give me a thumbs up that the audio is playing, I would appreciate it. I'll probably have to get past this ad here for a second. So I'll let this do what it's going to do. Okay.
Settlers of Catan is a 3 to 4 player board game where players try to collect resources and build a civilization to earn victory points. The first player to earn 10 victory points wins the game. Players get 1 victory point for each settlement they build, 2 victory points for each city they build, 2 victory points if they build the longest road, and 2 victory points for assembling the biggest army. There are also development cards that can give players victory points. To set up the game, first shuffle the hexagonal terrain pieces face down. Then, randomly flip them over and make them into a hexagon made of 19 terrain pieces. There are 5 terrain types in Catan, including hills, forest, mountains, fields, pasture, and desert. Next, place the numbered water cards around the outside of the hexagon by placing 1 water hexagon against every other terrain with the numbered side facing in towards the center. Fill in the blank spaces between the numbered water cards with the blank water cards. Now, randomly place the numbered tokens on the terrain spaces, skipping the desert and water spaces. Place the robber token on the desert. The terrain spaces produce resources and provide cards that you collect to help you build. The hills make brick. Forest makes lumber.
I lost my connection there. So let me go ahead and skip back just a few moments of that video and I'll turn it back on. My apologies.
Each player rolls the dice, and the player who rolls the highest number goes first. Play moves clockwise around the table. On the first turn, players set one settlement at any intersection where 3 terrain hexes meet, and one road on an adjacent line leading away from their settlement. Players may not place their first settlement on a junction that is adjacent to another player's settlement. Then, going in reverse order, players place an additional settlement and road. Next, each player receives one resource card for each terrain that their second settlement borders. For example, if a player's second settlement is at the junction where a mountain hex meets 2 forest hexes, they would take 1 ore card and 2 lumber cards. Now, the player that placed the first settlement goes first. To start a turn, the active player rolls 2 dice. The combined number on the dice determines which terrain hexes produce resources for that turn. For example, if a player rolls a 6, every hex with a token that says 6 on it makes its resource. Any player that has a settlement in an adjacent junction gets 1 resource card for that numbered hex. If you have a city in the junction, you get 2 resource cards. There are no hand size limits, but if a player rolls a 7, the players with more than 7 resource cards discard half of their resource cards. Also, when a 7 is rolled, the player that rolled it gets to move the robber token to any hex on the board. The robber covers the numbered hex, and that terrain produces no resources for as long as the robber stays there, even if the numbered token is rolled on the dice. If there is a settlement or city on a junction where the robber is moved, the player that moved the robber chooses 1 card at random from the owner's hand and steals it. After the dice have been rolled and resource cards have been distributed, the active player can trade resources with other players, trade with the bank, or buy something. They can do any combination of these things on their turn. Any player trades are legal, so long as both players agree. However, players cannot trade development cards. To trade with the bank, players must exchange 4 identical resource cards for 1 card of any type. If a player controls a settlement on a port junction, which is a port on a corner of a numbered water hex, they can use the ratio listed on that water hex to exchange resources with the bank instead. For example, the player has a settlement or city on the corner of the water hex that says 3-1. They can trade 3 resource cards instead of 4 to get another card from the bank. If there is a specific resource symbol on the port, that ratio only applies to trades for the matching resource. Players can also buy something on their turn. To buy a road, settlement, or development card, players follow the key on the building cost card to pay the bank for their piece. For example, a player can pay 1 brick and 1 lumber to build a road. When a player buys a piece, they place it on the board immediately. Roads must be placed on a line between hexes and must connect to another road, settlement, or city the player owns. Players can only build 1 road on each line. If they have the longest road in the game, and it is at least 6 pieces long, they get the longest road card, which is worth 2 victory points. If someone else builds a longer road, get that card. To build a settlement, a player must place it on an intersection between hexes that is connected by at least 1 road. They may not place a settlement on any junction where there is an existing settlement, and each adjacent junction must be empty for the player to place a settlement there. Players can only place cities by upgrading settlements. If they build a development card, they can play it on their next turn. players can only play one development card per turn. Each card has instructions on it. But one of the most common and important cards is the Knight. The Knight allows players to move the robber to any terrain hex and steal a resource card of their choosing from the owner of an adjacent settlement or city. When a player plays a Knight, they place it face up in front of them and leave it there. It stays in place for the remainder of the game. If a player has more than 3 knights in front of them at any point of the game, and they have the highest number of knights, they get the largest army card. This card is worth 2 victory points. Play continues until one player gets 10 victory points and wins.
So that's the tutorial for how to play Settlers of Catan. What I'll do is jump back. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how the game is organized and structured. Now, the questions I have for us are, how would we classify this board game with respect to communication, information, strategy, moves, and network? So is there direct communication between players, or is there not direct communication? I get like an ad. So is there direct or indirect communication? And feel free to post in the chat or to unmute yourself.
It would be a direct communication.
Direct, right?
You're playing with the other game players. So.
Great. What about with information? Is it complete or incomplete? So do we know everything that's going on or not? So Kevin says it's incomplete. Why is that the case?
Because there are a lot of cards in the game that not played yet, and you cannot see their hands.
Right. So that would make it an incomplete game or incomplete information game. Now, if everyone's cards were upside and we got to see them, then this would be a perfectly complete information game. When it comes to strategy, can it be cooperative or competitive?
Well, it's competitive, but it can be cooperative depending on. I think it's set up to be competitive, right?
Yeah. So in essence, it's a competitive game, right? But there are cooperative elements. For example, trading one resource card with another player. That's a cooperative action.
Yeah.
When it comes to moves, is it simultaneous or is it sequential?
Sequential.
Right? Because each player goes on their turn.
Exactly, yeah.
And then lastly, given the network that you're able to see, at least in general, do you feel it's a simple network or a complex network?
Complex.
Okay. And so we can take this game and obviously classify it amongst these dimensions. And what we'll do next is we'll take a look at a Catan Universe, which is the electronic or the app version of the board game. Now, when it comes to this board game, this is a picture of the board game that I started playing or initiated, and then I'll walk through it to kind of demonstrate how this functions. So what I like to do is make sure my pin's working here. Now, when we think of the network, we might think obviously it's simple or complex, but we can unpack it, especially for this game, because it is complex. So the first thing we can look at is the network of the game and the board itself. And so, for example, we can see here where we can draw this network out. Now, obviously, I can draw this same shape for all the hexagons in this space. And I'm drawing like little dots to demonstrate where the nodes are in this network. So we can obviously make it far more complex. So the board itself has a network. But it isn't just the board, but there's also players interacting that can be a network itself. So in this game, we have 4 different players. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if we reordered it like this, what we can see is that there's different connections amongst these players. And I'll use a different color just to note that. So there's a connection here, a connection here, a connection here, a connection here. Are there any other connections that can be made between these 4 players?
You could connect A and D. You could connect C and B.
Right. So with 4 players, there's 6 potential connections between them. Now, in addition to the players interacting and creating a network, we also have this interaction with the bank, right? So again, we have our 4 players here, and all of them can connect to the single player, which would be the bank itself. So I'll put bank in the middle. And those connections are established based off of their willingness to trade resources with the bank in order to get a particular resource that they need. So in this game itself, there's a variety of networks that are going on. And this doesn't even include like moving the robber, which would be this character right here, and then moving it from one space to another space to another space based on if you roll a 7 or not, and so on. So
Yeah, I have a
there's
question about,
yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so there's a number of networks within this game itself. Go ahead, Ashley.
Yeah, I was wondering about the knight and the robber, because so you can't have a robber without a knight, correct?
The robber actually exists without the knight, or can exist without the knight. So the robber is a what we call like a non-player controlled piece, and it only moves from tile to tile if somebody rolls 2 dice worth 7 total. So if you roll a 1-6, or if you roll a 2-5, or you roll a 3-4, or you roll a 5-1 again, or 5-2 again, and so on. Once anyone rolls a 7, they're required to move that robber from its current tile to another one.
Okay.
And then the knight card allows a player to activate that as opposed to having the die roll activate that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, good question. So this first round is about placing settlements and roads, right? And in this case, we have a few players here. We have Lynn in the gray, Nasir in purple, Candemir in green, mine, Sim Tycoon in red. And obviously in that first round, it goes in reverse order after the first 4 have gone. So then I go 5th, Candemir goes 6th, Nasir goes 7th, and Lynn goes 8th. Now, what I'll do is after that first round, there's rounds 2 through N, and N just stands for some very large number in which the game ends. And obviously the player orders as follows: Lynn, Nasir, Candemir, and Sim Tycoon. And then the action for each player within their turn is to roll the dice, right? To get a resource allocation if it rolls on a particular number, to place a road, a settlement, city, or to purchase a game card, is to play any game cards that they have, is to complete their turn, and then to have the next player go. Now, what I like to do is go ahead and share my screen, or another screen, see if this works. Let me stop for just a second, and then I'll share again. And we'll go from this part. And this might take a moment because I have to set it up. I'm gonna share my iPad if it lets me. I just figured out this feature this afternoon. I was pretty excited that I can share my iPad screen. Okay. So here's my iPad screen. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of games. My son likes playing Crossy Road over there in the bottom right corner. I'm getting him into Catan universe, which is pretty exciting. So here's the game itself. Let me lower the volume a bit too, so it's not too loud when it starts playing the music. Okay, so this is a single player game. I played this growing up, obviously, and now I play with my son because I have to stay home and take care of him. So I'm gonna go ahead and open a game that I already started to show that map and to see where we're at the end of round 2. We'll go to game, and then I'll just open the one that I was starting. So here's our 4 players, and we already went through round 1. So everyone placed their settlement and their road, and now we're at the end of round 2. And the end of round 2 is me rolling the dice and then being able to see what I get. So I'll go ahead and press the die roll in the bottom right corner, and I rolled a 7, luckily. So I get to move the robber. in this case, because the robber, I have a rule that says it's a friendly robber for the first round or the first few rounds. I can't move it onto someone else's tile and steal from them. So it's only giving me, in this case, 2 options to place the robber. And that's in the tile in the right corner of the wheat and in the tile in the left corner of the rock, labeled 2 and 111 respectively. So I'll go ahead and move it to the number 2 and leave it there. So now I have my like to reach the different intersections of the map in order to maximize the resources I can get based on the die rolls. And we'll go ahead and stop sharing the screen here for a second. So I'll take a picture of that before I go and add it to the spreadsheet. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we'll discuss this for a little bit. And that's it. So thanks to those who are attending, obviously for those who are watching.